you're doing some workforce strategy work and resource management at Edward Jones. And I want to go back to your time doing people analytics at Edward Jones too. But first of all, I think that's new for you. Can you explain what that is and
Yeah,
what does that remit entail? And why that maybe we can talk about how there's like a career path in that direction too for people in analytics.
Cole, I think it is. Um, I think the latter part is really important, and so Edward Jones is a private partnership. So we're a large organization. We have over 55,000 associates across the United States and Canada. So luckily for those of your listeners who are in Europe, we don't have to deal with GDPR, which is fantastic. But as you go through it, um, the scope of the organization, such as most of our organization are financial advisors. So if you're familiar with Edward Jones or a client of Edward Jones, you've definitely seen our branches. We have the third most amount of branches across the United States. I think right after Starbucks,
Yeah,
and
you're like Subway.
it is. It's
You're
right
everywhere.
after. It's literally
Yeah.
right after Starbucks and Subway. So
Well, I want to come back to the future of work here for a second because I know that's a part of kind of what you're working through. Why is that such a boring topic right now?
I think it's really. I think there's a whole host. It's because we're at this crossroads. So some people would say it's the most exciting topic we could do in HR.
Welcome to Directionally Correct, a people analytics podcast with your host, Cole Napper, and today's guest, Buddy Benge, head of workforce strategy and resource management at Edward Jones. Hey, Directionally Correct fans. This podcast is dedicated to you to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively bring workforce intelligence and AI into the workplace. If you're looking to stay connected to the podcast, make sure to subscribe to Directionally Correct Substack newsletter, watch videos on Spotify or YouTube, or listen to the podcast on your app of choice. If you're looking to build up your skills this year, sign up for the Data Driven HR Academy at datadrivenhracademy.com, where you'll learn key concepts from Cole's book, People Analytics. And if you're looking to hear from Cole directly, reach out to him at colenapper.com. As always, all opinions are our own, and thanks for being a listener. What do you want to talk about first?
Well, why don't we just start with a little background and we'll go from that because we both share, a really unique background in the space of it because we're both, Southern boys from Louisiana and Mississippi and from the depths of the swamps. And how do you end up in corporate America? Talking about analytics is a fun thing.
Mississippi River Delta and its impact on people analytics. The
Analytics.
article writes itself. Well, tell us a little bit about your background, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I started out, I have a unique background for what it is. So I started coding when I was 18 years old for like old school back AOL, not a paid employee of AOL by this point in time, but they used to have text-based video games. And if you like know the history of Mark Case, the founder of AOL, that's the whole premise of AOL was starting out on like old school CompuServe by how they were building like connections between like gamers. And so I ended up learning to code by doing this for a number of years, and then you know by happenstance I ended up getting my undergrad degree in history. And most people, when you get an undergrad degree in history, they go, well, how do you end up doing math for a living and or business or anything useful? And much in the same way, like when I started, I was planning to get my PhD in history. And I had a wonderful father who worked in construction and was not above putting me in ditches, all of it. So when you graduate with a degree in history, it means you do not have a job if you graduate with a degree in history in Mississippi at that point in time. So I had to go back to working construction, and I made like a rookie management mistake, Cole, like right off the bat, which is I made the mistake of telling everybody on Friday what we would be doing on Monday, which in this case was digging ditches in 108-degree Mississippi heat. And then right after that, nobody showed up to work. So I was in a ditch all day digging, and at the end of it, I was like, "Well, how do I get people to come to work?" And that was the fundamental question that has like led me down this path. So I end up getting my master's degree uh, from Cornell and enjoyed it. Got into HR, was really into statistics and the economics part, And so I always gravitated towards it. And then when I joined my first company, which was Raytheon, all the way back in 2005 or six or so, one of the first things I did was actually build a dashboard out of, Visual Basic and Excel all the way back then. So, and that has begun my like lifelong obsession with people analytics. And I've been lucky enough to have a career that I've got to see it at Raytheon, where working with some folks may know on the, if they follow the podcast, with Bob Motion, where we help design strategic workforce planning at Raytheon, and then ended up getting to start up people analytics at Monsanto, carry that over to Bear, and then start up people analytics again at Edward Jones. And so it's been a big blessing to get to see a number of different companies, but also this whole career path change for really 20 years, which I know you know this, but that makes us like basically ancient in the space of what we do and where we work.
You're a little bit more ancient than me, Benge.
Oh,
Well, so before we get too down into business, what's better, Mississippi fried catfish or St. Louis barbecue?
oh, this is the Cole. This is different. Like that. I didn't realize it was gonna be so hard hitting.
I know I was going to shot for the heart right out of the
Yeah,
gate.
you gotta. The bigger question is Mississippi barbecue and St. Louis barbecue on the same level? That's one big question that you got to get to. Uh, Missouri itself actually has really good fried catfish. So if you
Really?
get to the right places, yeah. So if you're ever in Missouri, all the way through, there is a spot called Catfish Haven. This is free advertising. They did not pay me. That is in Farmington, Missouri, which is all you could eat catfish for like $15 a plate. And it's like one of the really old school places that it's really good. But fried catfish is like way, way up there. And Mississippi soul food is almost impossible to beat. So
Yeah.
Mississippi soul food is really there. If you're talking about barbecue, though, I can tell you there are two places in the United States, and one of them I don't know if it's even open anymore. And but if you're in St. Louis, and this is why St. Louis barbecue is the best, it's because of either Pappy's or Bogart's if you're in the St. Louis area. But Bogart's ribs are quite honestly insane. They finish them off in this apricot glaze, and then they take a flamethrower and like caramelize it, and you eat them and you're in heaven. So that is number one. And then there is a gas station. I do not even know the name of it in Texas. It's in East Texas on exit 571A off Interstate 20. That's how like I don't even know the name of it, but I know what exit to get off on the interstate. And there it's in really phenomenal barbecue. So if you said, buddy, the best barbecue in the United States for you, those two places, hands
You want to hear
down.
something weird? I've actually been there.
Oh, see, that's good. That
Because I go I-20 between Dallas and Louisiana where my family is. And so I've stopped at 521A like 100 times.
Oh, it's
That's
so
funny.
it's so good, but they actually one time I sat in there, Cole, and and this is part of like I've lost a lot of weight in the last few years, but back when I was at my like champion eating weight, I guess I would put it on there.
Your zenith.
My zenith of putting through there was I sat there and ate, and we uh we go through it, and I ended up getting like seconds and then I think thirds. And they're like, finally they come out and they're like, well, we have to take your picture and put it on the wall because nobody has sat down for as long as you and have sat here and eaten as much as you. And then I was like, I've got to question my life choices at this point in time. But I'm a lover of barbecue, but Mississippi soul food is that's where home is. And I don't know if you feel the same way, but it's like, once you get a plate of greens and pinto beans and fried catfish or
Mhm.
really good fried chicken or in any, I mean, you can just keep going down it. Just huge. I will tell everybody like there is an underrated part. Now, when I say it, some people are going to recoil. There's one part of St. Louis barbecue that is highly underrated, and that is what they call snoot, which is exactly what it sounds like, which is like barbecued pig snout. And it has this like and it's like I've only seen it in St. Louis. I've never seen it anywhere else, but it's like this at first you're like, "Well, I don't wanna necessarily try it," but it's like basically like barbecued bacon almost. It's got like that same fattiness, all the other parts, and so it's from a barbecue spot, that's pretty good, but out of the realm of the normal.
Yeah. No, we're officially pivoting. This is now a food
It
podcast,
is
no
a food.
longer people analytics. It's just so funny to me because we have a pretty global audience. I mean, we cover all the United States, but people from all around the world listen to this, and so it's always funny to me when I bring somebody on like you, who's kind of like from where I'm from,
Mm.
and we just talk about this stuff because I'm like, I know this is throwing like 95% of the people off. Like they're not liking this at
E
all.
exactly, they're going like, "I thought we were gonna talk about analytics, and he's talking about pig snoots and pig noses? Like, what the heck is going on?"
Absolutely. Well, I don't know. So I think currently you're doing some workforce strategy work and resource management at Edward Jones. And I want to go back to your time doing people analytics at Edward Jones too. But first of all, I think that's new for you. Can you explain what that is and
Yeah,
what does that remit entail? And why that maybe we can talk about how there's like a career path in that direction too for people in analytics.
Cole, I think it is, um, I think the latter part is really important, and so
Hmm.
from the part, being in people analytics for so long and having created it, people talk about the career pathing quite a bit, and that's a lot of questions I get in general. And because my career pathing, even with people analytics, starting at Monsanto, by the time I finished at Monsanto, I was the head of HR shared services as we go through it. And so you get all of these different um, pieces of flavors of what we're doing. And as we think about the future of analytics and what is AI's impact, and I will get to what that means for workforce strategy, it's just huge. If you think about people analytics and the ways that we grew up with it and what we've done from,
Mhm.
well, how are you cleaning data? How are you putting data? How are you delivering insights? All of that is about to be fundamentally disrupted. Some people might say destroyed, shifted by what the future of AI is and what that looks like. So what was really exciting for Buddy, uh, and I guess I'll occasionally talk to myself in the third person. I don't know if that's
I was like, is that a power move or so?
a
What's going
power move.
on
I don't
here?
know. I don't know what's happening. But as we go through it, it was a really important move as we see it. So this is really brand new for us. So a lot of people have heard about, well, what is the future of work? What is all of this going through? And so my role now is helping define the future of work for Edward Jones. And so a lot of people may not know about Edward Jones. Edward Jones is a private partnership. So we're a large organization. We have over 55,000 associates across the United States and Canada. So luckily for those of your listeners who are in Europe, we don't have to deal with GDPR, which is fantastic. But as you go through it, um, the scope of the organization, such as most of our organization are financial advisors. So if you're familiar with Edward Jones or a client of Edward Jones, you've definitely seen our branches. We have the third most amount of branches across the United States. I think right after Starbucks,
Yeah,
and
you're like Subway.
it is. It's
You're
right
everywhere.
after. It's literally
Yeah.
right after Starbucks and Subway. So it's really the understanding and identification of where's the intersection of the future of work between our legacy home office, which historically has been based in St. Louis and Tempe. Topics such as AI and automation and what's the future of that, onshore, offshore. What are all the ramifications of how do you think about where work is located, especially in the new world we live in? And for an organization like ours that was primarily US and Canada focused, what does that actually mean? And then also really creating the underlying infrastructure with process excellence to say, well, how do you actually take work down from historically how we've looked at it from, when we first started doing strategic workforce planning years ago, you talk about, well, what are your critical roles, your strategic roles, your key roles, your transitional roles, and now that's just too broad. It's what's the actual work to be done? How do you
Hmm.
take that work, figure out those tasks, re-engineer those into new jobs that look completely different, and then how does job architecture place that into it? And so we sit at the center of all of that for the organization, how we think about what that future looks like across every function in the firm overall. So it's an exciting spot to be in. It's brand new for Buddy, so I won't say that it's not. Sometimes you go a little bit of chaos, Cole, and a little bit of art, but it's figuring out how those all overlay. And the great part about having an analytics background and getting into it, And I don't know if you feel this way because I know you've had similar roles, but you have all the data backing you. You know where all the bodies are buried. You know where these components are. You can sit there and go, well, what parts of attrition? What is the hiring cycle? What does it look like when we talk about what's the future of the employee value proposition? All of these pieces come into that in ways that are just unique to this world we've found ourselves really built in now the last year or two and going forward.
Well, you just asked yourself a bunch of rhetorical questions. Can you answer any of those questions? Like, how are you going about doing that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so as we start to think about how do we define it, it's really through deep discovery conversations with leaders around what that is. But the things that we found, I don't know if, there might be other folks that throw me off the call too when I go like, I don't necessarily know if it's good to ask people like, well, what are the capabilities of the future that we need? And those are questions like we used to ask. And then every answer of that was, I don't know. I have no idea what 5 years into the future looks like. I'm trying to make it 3 months into the future as we go through it. And that's something that we hear all the time, and we get asked that all the time. It's like, well, buddy, what are the skills of the future we need? And I go, if I knew that, I'd probably leave and start my own consulting company and become a billionaire. But I don't. And so it's only through that discovery of what it is, and also discovery of the work that we go, well, what work are we still doing all the time that we really don't want to do and we shouldn't be doing, but we've been just so stuck in our ways that we go, oh, well, we have to do that. And how do you like really rethink how that is to free up the capacity and capability? So we've brought together teams from across the organization. So in our core future of work team, we have our AI automation folks, we have our onshore, offshore sourcing folks, we have our process excellence folks, we have our upskill, reskill, we have FP&A, which is a huge part of understanding all of this. We also, it's been really good. We've started bringing on a lot of our other HR partners just to touch base into what we don't use the traditional lever language that people may be familiar with, like build, borrow, but there's parts of that from the buy and build part that you still have to connect across all your human capital centers of excellence too, to ensure you're delivering that in the right way. Because quite frankly, a lot of the future of those functions are changing at such a fantastic rate too, that it's how are they all, not to sound too cliche, but they're like, people would say they're building a plane while they're flying it, but they're actually building their own planes in the air while trying to gas up a whole other plane that's flying. And it's while somebody's trying to, our groups are like trying to do air traffic control for all of that. So it's, it's all of these cliches clashing together all at once in some cases.
Do you mind if I pull something up? Because you mentioned, it seems like the AI workforce strategy, and I'm assuming like the usage of AI agents kind of falls within that. And we'll talk about the future work more here in a second. But something got published today and then immediately taken down by the company called Mercor. So, for those of you who are not deep in the AI space like me, Mercor is actually the company that's behind a lot of the evaluation of the top LLM models. And so, what they do is they bring in actual experts like legal experts or writing experts or coding experts and pay them lots of money to train the models to get better. And so, what they did is they published this research of scoring the top AI agents that are out there right now from the top companies and their ability to successfully manage a cross application task. And they found that Gemini 3 Flash High is the top scoring model for agents right now at 24% of the tasks going through successfully. That's the high water mark. And it goes all the way down to less than 4% for Kimi 2 thinking. The reason why this was interesting and controversial and why they took it down is because they realized it was terrible publicity for themselves. Because what they found is everybody's saying that these AI agents are working, and what they found, which I talked about in my book and we've talked about on the podcast before, which is when you have multi-step processes in a task and you look at it from a lean Six Sigma point of view, any amount of error, like let's say you're 99% accurate, but you go through 100 steps in your process, you're going to get down to something like 24% accuracy, which is horrendous. No one would ever trust something that is 24% accurate. And so I don't know if you've seen this, buddy, but how do you react to this in terms of, what's going on in the world of AI agents right now.
Yeah, I think it's really there's uh, probably three things if I was going to say like what it is, and it's interesting. I hadn't seen this article yet, but when I think about AI agents, and I think Cole, it's right. We're right at this birthplace, but also whole organizations are being birthed to do this. So, you know, a lot of times we get caught up in talking about all the front runners of going through where investments are and where the talent is and all of these pieces, but it's also where's the development of all of these tools and how does it sit in organizations that aren't selling it right as a service and getting through it. So there's a great deal of, I think, complications and just immaturity at the very front end, and people have been so aggressive and we've all been so like optimistic about it that we haven't let ourselves go to like, well, hey, we're also flying in like the first plane of like, we're like one, like not even a generation from Orville Wright, like going through it. And so it's, and we're already trying to move it from a maturity standpoint from Orville Wright into, hey, 1960s TWA. And that's just 50 years of growth. And even though we can trust the technological cycles to speed up, I don't think we've come to, at least with our current market situation with all of it too, that like understanding of like how does maturity work in technologies in a real sense versus even like 20 years of the internet where we've come, it's still 20 years as we've gone through it. Now the part of that that's out there is we could talk about AI and the birthing of AI and you go, well, yeah, buddy, but if I really wanted to critique you, it's like 50 or 60 years old, like as we've gone through some of that from the very first
Mhm.
part. And how much better are we going to get? And then the other complicating question here is, does more data centers actually help it? Does consuming more data actually help it? I would make the argument, call. I don't know what you would think, but a lot of times the greater the data needs we have, the more complexity we build into the system and the more errors we build completely through because we're trying to give stuff access to all of it, and that's not a way we learn. It's, if we think about something as simple as the M dashes, right? Why do we get M dashes? Like, who ever used M dashes in their normal writing ever? And now M dashes everywhere, like, or like the surprise language, you can instantly tell all AI writing because it's like, it wasn't this, it was this, and you're just like, nobody, how do we get to things that even make sense when you're reading it? Sometimes doesn't is a whole other. Well, in Mississippi, we don't talk like that. That's what I could say. I could say.
Buddy, I always talk like that. I don't know what you're talking about. No, those are some really valid points, and I think, um, yeah, like one of the things that interesting from a first principles perspective is we're never going to cross the chasm from probabilistic to determinative, right? Deterministic. And so if people are having expectations of deterministic outcomes from LLMs, they're never going to be
Mm,
good enough.
yep.
And so what we're going to have to do is sort of come to an armistice as a society of what problems require determinism and what problems are where probabilistic calculations are acceptable, and knowing when to fragment from one to the other. And I think that's really the key. I've been part of this kind of working group through PSYOP that's talking about this issue. And this has come up many, many times because folks are expecting determinism and not getting it. And I think that's where things go wrong.
Yeah, I think the other part, and I think this is also where I think if you get really provocative thought leaders on it, th- if you think about AI as a creator, it's really restructuring what the definition of creation is to also to your point between the determinism um, and all the way through in the probabilistic part because what is the art of creation? And so many things that people use AI for, like if AI takes it and it creates a new image out of conglomerating and aggregating how many other parts, you go, well, is that truly a new piece of art, or what is that? And what's the difference between a human being doing that with all the experiences of it? And that's a part that I think will continue to be a challenge as we drive to it is what defining even something as simple as what is the art of creation and what does it look like from to your point from a process standpoint, the deterministic part, I don't know how it will ever get there. And this is where you go to well, what is the wage component of errors, right? Like, what part of it is like, how much money did I spend, and what error rate am I acceptable by the dollar spent? That's not something we talk about, but it's been a big thought of mine. It's like basically, what's your for organizations that want to run as lean as possible, are they like, well, yeah, there's a 70% error rate in your payroll, and everybody's like, well, all the humans don't actually want to work there anymore, but yeah, the
Yeah,
bots are fine.
absolutely. Well, I want to come back to the future of work here for a second because I know that's a part of kind of what you're working through. Why is that such a boring topic right now?
I think there's a whole host. It's because we're at this crossroads. So some people would say it's the most exciting topic we could do in HR. And then parts of me go, well, we've been talking about the future of work. We should have always been talking about the future of work as a human resources, group, as organizations go, the future of work should have been always occurring at any point in time. And we go, so why are we all of a sudden just now going, now it's super important to talk about the future of work? It was just as super important to talk about the future of work 10 years ago as it was 20 years ago, right? And it's like my uncle was a forester, and they always said, when was the best time to plant a tree was, you know, 40 years ago. The second best time is now. And we've gotten through it. So we're having conversations that we could have been having the whole part in time. And we're really the business we would have been much better met meeting the business there versus thinking about, hey, what are the operational elements of it? And so as we get into it, it's really about what is in that case, that's why it's boring. It's just like, hey, we should have been doing this all the time. And the exciting part is, are we creating brand new functions where what is the future of human capital interspersed with groups across AI, all of our sourcing friends, everyone else, where you have completely different structures depending on what occurs and what goes through it. So for me, as we get into it, it's like, hey, some of the conversation more because you're trying to set up the business case for stuff we should have been doing the whole time, and the other part's exciting because it's brand new, but there's still a whole bunch there in the middle too of chaos, of organizational politics as you get into this because it's in this whole historical part. I feel like sometimes we're meeting like some of our more forward-thinking leaders where they were at, you know, decades ago. Yeah, Cole, it reminds me of just to bring back a little bit of people analytics. I don't know, Cole, if you know when the first book on like attrition was ever written.
Was it the Jack Fitz in stuff from back in the day?
No, it's way before then. It was a 1918 book about machinist attrition after World War One because they couldn't attract machinists into the car manufacturing plants right after World War One because they were moving around so much for the incremental pay. You go, that was 1918. That's 108 years ago, and yet we still talk about stuff like predictive attrition studies today. Like we're like, oh, this is the cutting edge of something. You're like, well, they wrote the first book 108 years ago, so I don't know how cutting edge it really is. It's exciting, but it's not, on that part. And so that's kind of where like Buddy's brain is like on the sitting. It's like, well, how do we figure out the basics and how do we get to this? Because some of the stuff people were talking about, the future of management structures 150 years ago, and you go like, hey, this isn't rocket science, but it feels like it sometimes when we get caught up all in it.
Well, what other controversial opinions do you have about HR, buddy?
Oh, I have Cole. This is it, and I have to say this is Buddy as Buddy, not as in my role of anything specific. But I start to think about you think about the future of also what you just said. So the first part is, why is HR technology so bad, Cole? Like, why is it like, why are we cursed with bad HR technology all over? And there'll be a lot of vendors on this go, buddy, the HR technology is not bad. And you're like, we're right. It's because every organization configures their HR technology somehow in the worst possible way to extract value from it. And we continue to do it every single time. So the first part is like, really the first controversial opinion is your HR technology is bad and you're never going to do anything about it. So you just got to keep moving on for whatever these parts are. And even if you do something about it, it's like incremental, right? And this gets back to the future of work too. It's like, how are we setting up our systems to actually produce data that we can use as an asset or to feed? Like, think about most HR systems for everybody that would be listening. I guarantee if we go talk to them and go, well, how great is your HR data? Every one of them is going to go, buddy, it is the way I say it, it's like a raccoon in the bad part of town. It is skinny. It is not good. It is like not in great shape. It's mangy. It's rough. And you go, well, why don't you fix it? And you go, well, that costs money. And there's what's the value perceived? And you go, well, you'll never get to the value capture of it if you throw it away. So if you think about, let's take performance management. I'm just going to riff for a bit, Cole, if that's okay. So
I'm just gonna let you talk. You just
yeah,
talk, and I'll just sit here.
yeah. So think about performance management and why performance management is like one of the biggest hoaxes that's ever been put forth on this planet. Like number one, that anybody would actually know. Like you basically know what great looks like, and you kind of know what really horrible looks like, and everything in the middle is all the margins. And you go, so, but then the problem is we do all of that, and then what do we take that data? We put it into a system. We ask leaders. Now we don't even ask leaders. Do they go, hey, we'll have AI bots actually write performance reviews, so you don't actually have to have a conversation with somebody about it in a way that's real or natural. You then put it in the system, you demonetize that data completely in all the ways, and then you go, well, why does no one like performance management? You go, well, no, duh, like none of it's good. Like all of these parts go through it. And then you get back to the HR technology part. They're not talking across systems with one another. They're not moving in the right ways. None of it's connected. We're making decisions without it. And then we go, well, we're never going to invest in that because, hey, it doesn't have any value. You're like, well, of course you're never going to see any value. You've set everything up completely horribly and configured it to meet processes that you probably shouldn't even be doing in the first place. So that's I don't know if that's too loud of an opinion as we go through all of it.
You
Uh,
got any other thoughts? Like, what about
oh,
like talent acquisition metrics?
oh yeah. So if you sit there, you think about this is another key part. Like you start thinking about TA data. Where do we get obsessed with TA data? We go, oh, it's quality of hire. It's what is the time to fill, and you go, who is actually measured against that? One, how do we actually know the quality of hire? So what are the two basics when we go to quality hire? We go to the manager. Would you hire this person again? And like do you know how bad someone would have to be for the manager after like 3 months to go, "Of course, I would not make the most horrible decision of my life ever again." Like it's after 3 months, it's a judgment on the manager as we go through versus saying, "What is it?" So, and then or we go like, "Well, did they stay for a year?" And you go, "Well, what's the purpose of that? Do we know if we made our money back on the what was the ROI on this investment like of a person over the first year? Like 3 months they're learning the job, 6 months they're going in, and then if they are really bad, the manager generally doesn't know. So after a year, they're still here. Then, like during the second year, their performance is like wavering, where the manager's finally like, I really don't like this person. And then the third one's where the manager finally goes, I have to put them on PIP. So you don't even get the data for 3 years of whether the person was actually good or not. And we're like, oh, well, this is what we need to be going after, across the board. Makes almost zero sense from a real measurement perspective. And then back to the performance management part too, because we don't even actually know how to manage the performance to say whether the person was good or not. And then on the second element, then you go, well, how long did it take us to fill that job? And you're like, well, is shorter better? Well, yeah, our time to fill is only 38 days. And you're like, well, how did you get the candidate? Like, where did they come from? How did you source them? What are the actions? And it's like, well, oh yeah, they just applied in through our system, and yeah, we looked over their resume, and then that's how long our. You go, what does that like? That doesn't tell me if was that the right way to go about doing it? Did you source the folks correctly? What protocols did you use to do that? Because essentially for some of these it just becomes a breath test. It's like, hey, here's a mirror. Did you breathe into it? Did it fog up? Great. This seems pretty good. And those are the parts where it's like, how do we change the nature of some of the conversations? I know you work a lot on this. You probably have a million ideas on how to fix all this, Cole, but it's like, how do we get past some of these like ways that are like now 45 years old to say like, can we think of other can we think of other parts to get to it, across the board?
Who hurt you, buddy?
No, it's not, it's just like the future of what we have to get to. It's not these things all had their time and place for usefulness, and some of them will still have it, but but it's like even getting on some parts, it's like, Cole, we talk about data governance and we go, well, how many people did you hire last year? Well, the real answer to that is depends. Well, one, what's the definition of the word hire? Right? So some people is that a for some TA folks, right? Does it mean that that's a person that's in the chair working? Is it someone that we hired but they haven't made it quite to the chair, so they're in that weird in between stage because we're not responsible if they fail a background check? does the hire include contractors? Because we put forth, effort to hire folks on that. Usually, a lot of times we don't count that. Does it mean, well, what'd you do from all your statement of work folks that are outside of that? Does that count as a hiring process? Because we've got the piece. It's all of those constructs as we get into it. Is, hey, that could look really different if we actually expanded what all that is. So it's out of a place of love. It's not out of a place of pain, I guess. Though a lot of this stuff's gonna sound like, when I first started going through this, my wife has to hear all these rants, Cole, and she's like, "This seems like a lot of complaining all the time."
I mean, it's just me and you, man. Nobody else is
Yeah.
listening. So you can tell me whatever you want.
Uh,
But I mean, are there any other myths you want to bust?
yeah, the other part is like let's think about the future of compensation, right? As a career, as all of it. I mean, it's going to undergo such dramatic change as well. If we talk about, like, one of the myths that we have is, like, with job architecture, with this, it's like we're pricing roles, and one of the myths, we actually know what roles are worth what. So, and this is a such a complex, like, game theory piece of it, is that we actually, I would make the argument that for the most part, if you said, what is the value of individual pieces of task and work, except in very small operations pieces, we have so little knowledge of what value work actually brings. And it's because, there's and I'm not even meaning that for, like, explosive, like what we would consider like black swan work, like you invented the light bulb kind of work. I'm just talking about regular, like, day-to-day work. Like, think about how many and this is why, quite in particular, we've probably seen some of the stuff with, white collar jobs across the board, is because we can't go, well, how much value do we create by having 37 meetings in a week, right? We don't have any idea. And so it's like, well, is your job really to go to meetings, and then after the meeting you write an email, and then after you write the email, something gets done by someone else somewhere, and you go, well, what was the value of all of that? We don't have a really good way of defining it. So when people are asked, like, hey, well, what is your impact to this? We haven't even created a language for people to express that through things like their job anymore, or through the architecture of it. And so I think that's a part that has a really great deal of opportunity for what the future of work is and how we think about it in really different ways.
What else, buddy? What else you got?
Oh, that's still gonna. Well, maybe I should calm down. Like, does that's you call? Does any of that make sense? Like, or is, but you're like, Buddy is just going on crazy rambles the whole time.
No, I am just I'm eating it all up because like this is all stuff I say and then I feel like I'm the only person in the world. And so rather than just sit here and just repeat points I've probably said before in the podcast, I'd rather hear somebody else say it. So
Yeah,
what else you got? Come on, hit me with
yeah.
it. I want to hear it.
This a whole other parts. If you want to, it's really interesting. I don't know. And Cole, you probably written an article about, but the rise of coaching
Mm,
in the whole atmosphere of what that is, I think is really fascinating right now, because the other strange question about coaching in leadership development is how much of that will be done uh, by actual people in the future, and how much of that will just be done by agentic AI. And
yeah.
this is the really creepy part of agentic AI with it, because we all know there's been the controversies around AI sometimes giving people really horrific, especially like Grok, with the horrific advice that it gives. But if you go and look at, I would urge people, if you go to your, like, the leadership section of your local bookstore and actually start reading through it, you'd be like, well, most of this content seems vaguely similar to one another. And you go, and is it any better with the hustle culture that we have today? For a bot just to tell me, is like, you know what, did you say your morning platitudes? Did you, like, do these pieces? You're like, you could get that all automated in some cases, where if it's really generic advice, the value of that's going to get lower. So it gets back to our original statement about it. It's like, well, what's creative and what are you doing to create the future? And I think that's exciting for, like, leadership development, is going, like, what is the future of leadership development? Because I'm a big believer that in most organizations, leadership development isn't the most important thing. It's the actual only thing as we get through. And we've abdicated some of those responsibilities over the years to many different ways. And it's also one of those parts where for most leaders, if I'm just getting generic advice, then I can get that generic advice from a bot just as easy. I mean, the bot can read every leadership book that's ever been read and give you that amalgamation of all of that. quicker than a human being ever could. So I think it's also one of the areas I'll be ripe for what is the next generation of that look. And, quite frankly, in that, I always thought that speed of trust got it right, right? It's like, well, how are you building trust as you go through? And it's like, what is your acumen? How good are you at building people and teams? And, how are you building inclusive environments that do that? And we've moved away even from some of those, like, it seems like lately, even caring about what an inclusive environment looks like, even though there's tons of proof that it adds to the revenue of the organization. And in some of the cases, this current sweep towards productivity at all costs is sweeping some of those pieces away, while it still remains incredibly important to actually drive value for the organization.
What else you got,
Oh my
buddy?
god, oh my goodness.
Anything? Any stones left unturned?
Oh, there's probably a lot more. Like, what's the future of benefits? There's so many pieces, Cole, like, as we get into each of it. But
What's
it's
the future of benefits? I want to hear about it.
oh yeah. So if you think of, I mean, if I think about benefits, and you think about what that looks like, and you think about what's happening, especially across it, it's, we get more and more, like, systemic benefits, but without understanding healthcare in particular, and also the future of what retirement looks like. And this is really key for Edward Jones too, is understanding the future of retirement in America right now with a lot of the stuff going on is a little bit bleak. And so it's how are organizations helping people mitigate and understand what their own retirement risk is in their organizations, and how do you bridge that when we've seen further and further cuts, people pay higher deductibles for healthcare as they go through, and more of their dollars are getting eaten up by benefits that sometimes don't feel like benefits at all. And so it's how do you bridge that gap and go, well, what happens in this next generation of benefits for folks? Think about like something as used to be like relocation benefits. Well, in the current world where we go, we have everybody saying, please return to the office. But then you go, well, where are all the other benefits that when we all did used to move around the country for career development and growing through it? And you go, well, organizations have gotten out of practice. A lot of organizations have gotten out of practice with that. So, what does that look like for the future? Where do you put talent at? How do you gauge it with super high cost of living areas? Like, how do you balance it from of the benefits perspective as well? So there's a ton, I think, across there. And also then just how it's administered, which is, I think most people, if you said, how happy are you with all the administrations of your insurance companies and everything else, most people would be like, not too good, right? Is what we would say in Mississippi.
Oh,
Are
bless
you
its
ever
heart.
going to be able to show are you going to ever be able to show this episode, Cole, of me just like, nobody's going to watch this. They're going to be like, I'm done with it.
Oh, they'll watch it. I promise. This is amazing. I'm loving it. Got any more? I mean, I'm willing to keep going if you
Oh,
want to.
well, so this is another buddy pet peeve. Can we in HR get back to simpler language? Like, everybody knows this. I'm not a fan of the term, for example, talent acquisition. I'm like, hopefully we quit acquiring people like a number of years ago, like hopefully in the 19th century when it was outlawed. It's like there was nothing wrong with calling something staffing or recruiting, or like we continue in human resources, human capital, to continue to use language that we could have just stayed with the basics and it would have been fine, and we could have redefined the job in that way to add value. But instead we redefine the job title to create value, and I think that's something that is not healthy long term as we go through it. And I would love to see an organization just say, "Hey, we're going old school back, and it's about the value you create and the roles we expect those roles, the value we expect those roles to create, versus making increasingly more complex job titles that nobody actually understands, what they do at all." That'll be
Thoughts
my
about
last rant.
everything
Like
you
as a
said, but I just want to keep going. What else you got, buddy?
uh,
Come
I
on.
am. I think I'm all good now. I think
You
I'll
tapped
stop.
out.
That'll be my last part. Is I'm tapping out on the job title piece, but it's huge. But like I'm very proud. Like our team was called Human Capital Insights, which is a lot different than what people call people analytics, because it is really about driving the insights for a long time. But our
Mhm.
Human Capital Insights team was made up of four separate groups. So we had talent intelligence, we had people analytics, we had assessments, and we had employee listening. And you go, but if I tell people, well, I'm the head of human capital insights, people go, well, what does that actually mean? And you go,
Mhm.
well, how would I have made that job title where if I said that somebody would actually know what I did right off the bat?
Yep.
Versus going, would you like the 1 minute definition, or would you like the 22-minute like detailed piece about what all of that means? I don't know if you ever felt like that when you were leading analytics. Like sometimes people ask you like, "What do you do?" You're like, "Well, can I give? Do you need the? Do you really want to know what I do, or would you? Are you just asking because it's time for like the 2 minute answer for
Right.
what the job is?"
I mean, I've been saying this lately, like the word analytics, it's kind of like it's become a catch-all word. So if something means everything to everybody, it means nothing to nobody. And so I think we're just kind of in this position where they started using this word to try to be that catch-all for all those other things you described. But realistically, those are all very different things in a lot of ways. Um, so you tell me more about it.
Absolutely, and you're right. And so the reason for putting them together, and this is what we did, in my time at Monsanto towards the end, is the reason why did Buddy go into the role for HR services? Because in that case, you know, Buddy had vision of the data from the moment of creation to the moment of it became an insight. And there's an important part about like the life cycle of it. So I used to call it the farm to table of data, which a lot of people don't think about because we don't have like one view a lot of times of that farm to table of data because different stakeholders own all the different attributes of it. And if you're not managing that well, at the end it doesn't look like steak, right? So as you go through what is that? With here with the kind of the grouping of all of those was how do you drive that data and those insights working together in a combined way so that you're creating collective insights from across, people analytics, um, if you want to call it like the virtuous circle of data creation, Cole, is kind of
Mhm.
how I would call it. It's like, so if you think about people analytics, you do an in-depth study, you have a hypothesis, we test it, you come out with those insights, you go, well, how do I immediately turn that into reporting pieces that are automated so people can get that in ways in real time that are impactful? And then how does that impact, for example, employee listening and how we're going through it? So if you take like your typical like employee engagement part, what happens where like, well, how are people going to leave? And you go, well, what is your intent to leave? And we go, well, 80, whatever the score is, 85% of people have said they're going to stay. Well, then you dig down and you find some insight, and we present that to a leadership team. And a lot of time that's where the insight goes to die, like essentially. And everybody goes, yes, that is great. We're so happy you found that out. This is super impactful. And then like 3 months later, you've rolled stuff out and you're like, nobody even remembers you said it. They don't go through any part of it. And it's because we never created it into a living organism of itself for how you do that. So that was the idea as we built that structure to what to get to. Well, I say we got there? Absolutely not. But it is, I think that's a better way of trying to get to wherever you can create those virtuous cycles of how are you creating data? How are you creating insights from the data? Where does it go? But that also gets into the future of it because when we demonetize data, you break that cycle like right off the bat. And we're all guilty of that in almost all of our systems.
Well, buddy, you and I met originally through Talreos, and we saw each other pretty recently at the I4CP event. I don't know what do you think is valuable about the community part of people analytics?
I will tell you, this is something. If you said, buddy, in your career now, which is like 20 plus years, I would say the community that we live in is a really special community. And like Cole, I mean, the fact we're sitting here talking, we've been talking, I don't know, for a decade now. I don't know how long
Yeah, it's been a
it's been a
while.
long time. And then I think about other folks, like I remember like some folks like Al Adamson, he probably doesn't remember that we met like almost 20 years ago,
Oh, wow.
as you go through this. So Talreos in
Fun fact about
particular,
Al, first guest on the podcast that we had. So
I did not know
yeah,
that.
yeah, he was our very
That's
first.
a perfect first guest.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'll give some examples of just things that really made me. So the first group I ever belonged to was actually a group called the Attrition and Retention Consortium, which now
Mhm.
is called the People and Analytics Consortium.
Mhm.
But when it was the Attrition and Retention Consortium, we joined because we were looking at strategic workforce planning, and they had attrition benchmarks, which nobody else had, and trying to figure out. And I remember one of my first models I ever built because we were sitting there, and there was a gentleman from Ford whose name was Rob Tripp, and he had been with Ford for forever. He retired from Ford, and they had built a time series model for predicting basically hiring all the way back this probably in the early 80s. And as he was explaining this model, I go, that would work really well today. So we actually were able to take that model. I stole it, egregiously stole the whole idea and every part and adapted it at Raytheon. But it got to be where we could, once we knew the first month of the year, because of the strong cyclical nature of, especially in the defense industry, we could actually predict the number of hires at the end of the year just by having 1 month of data. We knew what the rest of the year was going to look like. And that model held up until the economic parts of it broke down with if people are familiar with how, like, for example, the market and if people are familiar with how basically
Was
the
it
stock market and
sequestration or
unemployment
something like
rates.
that?
Yeah, and so it flipped during the first Obama administration. So
Yeah.
after, well, the second part of the second term. But with that, there's so many pieces like that you can look at, but people have a lot of that figured out. Like things we don't like, we're like, who has it? There's actually probably somebody out there that's thought about that same question, right, and has provoked it. And so I was a big part of that group for a long time. And then when Talreos and we got invited to Talreos, it was the first time where like we had sit there, and I think the first Talreos was put on by Ian O'Keefe. He was one of the driving forces of it, and I think there were probably 17 to 19 of us in that first session. You go like, okay, here's 17 to 19 people talking about all the different parts, everyone else in the room, that like the smartest person you've ever met in the group. And so you're sitting there, and I'll be honest, you get a little bit of imposter syndrome when you're next to like people who have really thought about these in kind of issues in great ways. And you just start to have those conversations and you build it up. And now that group went from, I think, like I said, between the 15 to 19 of us that were there at the first session, I think the last one was 150. And you start to see, and all represented by almost all different companies, and just a huge shift in, how much information, how much data you can share. I remember we were sitting outside of a conference, when conferences on our subject just first started coming out, and it was Ian and a few other just really uh, heavy hitters in the space that were so much more forward thinking than I was at the time. And just getting to sit around the table after the end of the conference, not just even the stuff that's in it, and like our conversations afterwards, where it's like, oh, we're going to talk about what's the art of the possible in the craziest ways. You go, the development and growth there is just huge. So I would highly recommend for any you know people analytics professionals, and whatever area you're in, to make sure you're going in, and also make sure you're talking afterwards to go like, okay, what is the craziest stuff you're after? Because it may make your stuff a lot easier too.
All right, buddy. You ready to join me in Cole's Corner?
I'm ready to join you in Cole's Corner.
Welcome to Cole's Corner. All right, let's start out with some
As long as I'm okay with it, Cole, because after all my ranting, people might be like, "We need a break from like go back to barbecue. Can we get back to pig snoot?"
Yeah, well, maybe this will be a part of your answer then. If you weren't into people analytics or workforce strategy, what do you think you'd be doing with your career?
Oh, um, in a strange way, I think I would be a history professor at probably a corrupt community college somewhere. That is what I
I
think.
I was gonna say earlier, it's probably like high school baseball coach, like because they're always the history teacher. Yeah, so it's like I think that's like where a lot of those folks land.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
yep, Cole. That is pretty close to what I'm pretty sure I would be a history professor somewhere. I'm really passionate about I'm really am passionate about the history of the American South post
Mhm.
uh, Jim Crow, but Jim
Mhm.
Crow prior to civil rights, because it is a super underrepresented part of American history that actually, if you look at like today's world we live in, is directly responsible for what we live in today, and people don't seem to realize it. And that is probably where I would be focused on if we could. Outside of that, I was always good at digging ditches, Cole, so I could go back to being a ditch digger pretty quickly.
I mean, the world needs ditches. So there you go. What's the place you've never been to that you most like to go and why?
Oh, Okay, so this gets into some of Buddy's vices. So we'll say it. I've never been to London to actually like hang out in London. I've been all over Europe and I've been all over South America, which are some of my favorite places, but I've never been to London. And my big vice, Cole, is I smoke cigars, which is I know for some people a huge turnoff, but it's like my vice. And London has some of the best cigar, like historical cigar bars of all time. And so part of me just wants to go to explore like sitting down in some of these, very, very old cigar bars and just, relaxing and thinking about it, and then just exploring the rest of England as we go through it. I would also love to go to Antarctica, which is another kind of dream devoutly to be wished because it's you go Antarctica in some ways is you know like Alaska. I've been to Alaska twice, but I feel the same way. It's like a lot of it's been covered and it's mapped, but you're like it's still just that the the unknown, I guess, is the venturing
Yeah.
out into it. So one part of going to London is the very known, and especially about one topic, and then the next element's the unknown,
The thrill of
if you would.
adventure. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, Cole, I would ask you, like, what are your two spots then? We've never talked about that.
Yeah, it actually changes. I've said like I always like the places that have been like TV shows, so like New Zealand for Lord of the Rings, or like I think it's like Romania for Game of Thrones and stuff like that. Just like really like naturally beautiful places. Um, but if I was gonna like actually do something rather than just like walk around and see things, um, I have been thinking Dubai lately. Dubai seems interesting, just because you hear all these stories about how crazy it is there, and I'm like, oh, that'd be interesting. Um, and from a call to adventure standpoint, let me think about that. I would love to do some rainforest. I'd love to just go see in the rainforest. I'm not brave enough to like actually like try like live out in the rainforest or something, but I think trying to like go through like
Eh.
some tours of that would be fun too. Yeah. But let me hit you with the next one. So, if you were a character in any book, TV show, or movie, who would you be and why?
So what character would I be? This is so funny. So if you ever want to know what your worst interview answer question is, when I was in grad school, Cole. So the person asked me, this is the worst interview question all the times. What do you want to be when you grow up? Like most people don't know what they want to be when they're grown up. Like as we're going through. But growing up, I always wanted to be like Ryan Sandberg. He was the second baseman for the Chicago Cubs. And so I always thought when I was a kid, I could grow up to turn into Ryan Sandberg. Like the dream wasn't to be second baseman, it was to grow up to be Ryan Sandberg. And so I give this answer. I won't name the company in this interview, and I knew it was like the worst answer to an interview question ever, because one of the other questions is, what do you hate? Because I went to Cornell for grad school, and so with it in Ithaca, they go, well, what do you not like the most about Ithaca? And being from Mississippi, like you go from Mississippi to Ithaca, it's a like people assumed it was a huge culture shock. Ithaca itself was, but outside of Ithaca is like more Mississippi than Mississippi, like if anybody could imagine it. But there were, because nobody hunted around there, there was just deer everywhere. Like everywhere you go, just deer. And I'd go, well, I really wish they would do something about, because the deer, like you have to be on point like every second of the day. Like even at my apartment, like the deer would just stand outside the window, like, please let me in. It's cold. I don't want to be here anymore. And so I gave this answer about deer, and then I gave this answer about Ryan Sandberg. And the person at the end of the interview, if you ever want to know how bad you flubbed an interview, is at the end when they go, "Now watch out for those deer." That's how you know you failed an interview. If that's the end statement of anything anybody gives you.
Yeah, yeah,
So it was
you're not
Ryan
getting
Sandberg.
this job.
You're not getting this job, but the uh, Ryan Sandberg would be my answer just in general when I was a kid. But now if somebody said it, it's it, there's some shows like if I could be like around the positivity of a Ted Lasso, like just as an extra, that would probably be pretty great. Like, because you got it. Like, I love like Game of Thrones, but I'm like, out of all the shows you never want to be a character in is like Game of Thrones. It's like just brutal death, like as you go through it, or like right now. Like, I also love Abbott Elementary. I guess that would be another one like that's on television now. You're like, okay, you could probably do it, but it seems a lot of chaos, which I don't know if I could deal with that level of
Yeah.
chaos.
All right, buddy, I got you. I got one big question for you. You have more experience in this space than almost anyone. What do you know about people analytics and workforce strategy that you think no one else knows?
Oh, in the act of being humble, I think people know it. It's how do you make it happen? It's, when I was first growing up in people analytics, I thought it was about the data. And Cole, I think like for all of those are experienced now, it's never about the data. The number one, people will discount your data. They'll just be like, I don't believe any of your data at any point in time when it's something they don't believe in. It is all about the narrative and the storytelling and the actual bringing of people along. So, like 90% of people analytics, I'm convinced now, was more so change management about all the other attributes than was ever about like, oh, well, I created the greatest model ever, and I've built look at the data infrastructure I've built, and look what it enabled. And you're like, only folks down below care. Like leaders don't care about it. They're like, please give me the insights and the impact of what I needed, and that how you got there is a whole other ball of wax. So for me, it was, and it's something I'll be honest, I still struggle with sometimes because you still go like, oh my goodness, look at this, something really cool we did. And then when somebody's not like, and then the most disappointing is when people go, yes, that's really cool. And then they never do anything with it. And you go, well, that's because you failed the actual rule of it, which it wasn't about that. It was about change management and understanding the narratives that were going through it. And that's number one. And no matter how good you get at tools, how good you get at anything else, it'll never beat that. Like as you're going through the actual understanding in the desires and outcomes that leaders want. I- This is a personal like observation, and I will tell you, I'm not great at it. It's like we are sometimes really not great at listening in people analytics. Like for people that run employee listening and all of it, we're not really good at listening. And you're gonna be like, well, of course, buddy, did you just hear all the rants you just went on like as you went on it? But like if we think about how do we build decks, Cole, like even like how do we whether you build a narrative, a Word document, or you're building a PowerPoint deck, think about how many times, how many slides we're like, oh, well, we have 5 slides in the front end, but we have 78 slides in the appendix. And so you go in there with a conversation with a leader, and the leader has legitimate questions, and you're trying to show off how much you know by not actually like listening to the question the leader's asked. You're already like, oh, you can check slide 34. It's already been answered for you. And you go, well, this person was actually inviting you into a conversation that you just then immediately discount it as you go through it. And it's like, how do you bridge that and understand that to give people the flexibility and also give our leaders the understanding that, hey, we know you don't know all the answers, and it's how do you get into these conversations.
Buddy, I just want to make a public apology to our audience for not having brought you on the podcast like 3 years ago. I am so sorry to everyone because this should have happened a long time ago. So this is epic. I'm loving it.
Well,
Um,
I appreciate that call. I've been stressed out of it. Like I'm like, is anybody going to want to hear the because people that meet me, they know I'm going on like if you said Buddy's development objectives, every time for 20 years, like Buddy goes on tangents and also sometimes crazy rambles.
Amazing. All right, well, let's do some. What am I reading? We can't not talk about what's been going on with Eightfold. And there's been a million takes out there on it. I found this one. I thought it was particularly good. So by a guy named Dan Gallagher, he wrote an article in his Substack called "The Responsibility Gap in Algorithmic Hiring." And again, I'm not a lawyer. Buddy's not a lawyer. This is not legal advice or anything like that. But I think we are humans with opinions, and we can make our opinions about what's happened lately. One of the things that he noticed is there's two accountability gaps in recent lawsuits that are going on. One, he's talking about what's been going on with Workday. So he calls the gap the outcome responsibility, the Workday pattern. And then the second gap is the process responsibility of the Eightfold revelation. So essentially, for those of you who are more schooled in this area, this is thinking about like, process-based justice or procedural justice and distributive justice as kind of core gaps here. And then he shows how both of them are related. But I just wanted to take a step back here for a second and just mention that as a PSA, before I get your reactions to this one, everyone saw this coming. Like everyone who knew anything. I mean, these laws have been on the books for years around, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, I think is what it's called, and anything related to like the uniform guidelines of selection, that you have to show that if you're selecting for something, you have to prove that it's job related. It can't be a black box. You can't score people without their knowledge that it's happening. You have to be able to explain it when it's been happening, and the fact that like an eightfold is not the only tool out there, and this doesn't just apply to hiring and selection. This applies to promotion, basically any employment related decision this applies to, from some pretty good employment law that's existed for a pretty long time. And so I don't understand why so many people didn't see this coming. But with that said, what are your thoughts on what's been going on with Eightfold or Workday or this
Um,
article?
yeah, I think it's quite honestly, it gets back to the fundamental question a lot of times between this that we is like the old school Jeff Goldblum. We never just go back to Jurassic Park, and it's just because you could do something. The question is, should you do it? And we never answer that. And when people did answer it, they answered it in an Orwellian way, where it really did not get to the scope of what they should be doing. And
Yeah.
this whole part. I mean, we're out of the stage now with some of these AI recruiting tools where it's like you're getting companies blasted with more resumes than they've ever had before. So then to even like navigate, they have to turn to more AI tools. So they get caught up in this loop of, instead of just breaking it down and going like, well, what the, basically like what the what, like this isn't working. And then for the vendors, because, and I mean, I know they're trying to make money. I'm not going to judge Workday or Eightfold. But as you go through it, they're moving also to try to meet their vendors where they're in this race to this AI arms race that's going on right now too, to be like, well, let us show value versus starting at the point of like could, and then knowing in some cases that you're probably on the if you weren't outright on the violating the actual law, like you said, Cole, you were definitely violating the spirit of the law from some of the get goes, and that also tells you that where does responsibility lie on what companies want too with some of these future parts. Like I think about this with all the performance development piece, like you were talking about. You go, well, now we have people where their whole performance reviews are written by people are using it to write AI bots. It's like one of
Yeah.
the things they're highlighting. You go, well, what does that actually mean, and how much did you make sure there was a person on the? Sorry, my southern accent was about to come through heavy. Like, you
My
know,
southern accent.
and so like a not a person in the loop, but a person on the loop to actually review it. And it's very clear that if the person on the loop was there, did they have the, expertise or experience to actually judge that? You've got to be really careful. And it's not, we've heard about, well, we have to keep people in the loop, but there's people on the loop too that you have to keep there because letting it run amok is not going to work in any way for
Yeah.
and but it also gets back to your how you kicked off call. It's like, well, how much accuracy was in it anyway? If it's the best was 24%, like we said earlier for T, not so good. Like no,
Well, I want to make a criticism of them at two different levels. One level, they're smart people that work at all these companies. They knew better. They knew better, right? But the second level of criticism is, and I think this is actually worse, is they actually like, I think sometimes people interpret when I say things like always reference the IBM slide that said from like the 1970s, computers can't make decisions because computers can't be held accountable, and therefore if you replace the word computers with AI, that's a pretty good framework, because that's basically what the law intends, is like somebody has to be accountable for these decisions, because we have to be able to sue somebody if you mess it up, right? And but the criticism I want to make is they actually could have constructed ways to do this legally. They could have done all the same things, used all the same scoring methodologies, and had they gone through the appropriate procedures, could have done it effectively with AI. And they could have done it legally, and they chose not to. And almost every company in this space is choosing not to. And that choice to me is the larger criticism in this space, because like everybody's choosing to do this and they're like, well, maybe they will just never get caught. It's like, okay, well, that's probably going to catch up to you. And so I don't know. Do you have any reactions to that?
yeah, absolutely. It's just like the companies that dump nuclear waste because it's cheaper to pay the fine than it is to actually go through and do that. And I don't necessarily think that's an effective way to run a society. especially with it. The other part, because we're opening ourselves up, is like, you know, and sometimes I think about it's like, what happens when all of our we've turned over all of the hiring over to AI, and next thing you know, the AI has just hired another bot to like go through and do it. I don't know if you've seen this. They've started up a social media site that's just for bots, and you're
Yeah.
like, well, that doesn't seem like a you know a great idea. Or like Tesla's announcement today that, hey, we're moving away from cars. We're just going to build fully automated like humanoid robots, and you're like, well, this doesn't seem Terminator-esque in any real way whatsoever. And people just continually make those decisions, and it is a shortcoming. And
Yeah.
I, I feel like there's a group of folks that's like, if we can skirt right, you do that, and I think it's going to catch up even more. Like as you start to see the societal impacts of what we've been going through from this like next jobs revolution too.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these roosters will come home to roost in really
Oh yeah.
super tangible ways.
People don't like AI right now, and they
No.
especially don't like it making decisions about them behind their backs with no knowledge or recourse to the decision. People hate it, and
Yeah.
so yes, the chickens will come home to roost.
Yeah, and and to your point, Cole, like if you're not being transparent, this gets to the data transparency of everything we do, right? Even in the old school analytics pieces, it's like people don't want you to do creepy stuff. And you have some companies that would tell you like they used to like they'd say, "Oh, we don't do creepy stuff with your data," and then they would do creepy stuff with your data. And then you had some guys that just be like openly telling you, "We're going to do really creepy stuff with your data." And instead, and to get through that, we need you to sign a 27-page like terms and conditions of it,
Mm.
where you're like somehow you've accepted the worst conditions of all time, like, and now they've got a whole digital twin of you built somewhere that you don't know about. There's probably a digital twin of us having this conversation already right now happening somewhere.
Yeah, we had that. I won't get into that, but basically, I have some knowledge that people have been downloading the podcast probably to create like digital twins and things like that. I'm
Mm,
like, oh, this is so icky. But
yeah.
well, let me hit you with the next one. Just to kind of sort of along this vein, since we're talking about digital twins and digitization. The opposite of that was Amazon had a tool called MTurk. For those of you who don't do research, MTurk was a tool that came around, I don't know, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. And it was like people who would go online and take surveys and do research. And it was supposedly like this tool for like this vast scientific revolution. Like, great, we can do these cohort studies and all these different kind of social science things at scale. We've got all these people and we're getting this great data and yada, yada, yada. And the study came out earlier this year in Behavioral Research Methods, and it's called "Why You Shouldn't Trust Data Collected from MTurk" by Cameron Kay. And the authors put forward like why you should no longer trust it, and they give a bunch of examples. The funny thing to me is you should have never trusted it. It was never a reliable source. It was just a way of hacking the publishing process. And the fact that it took, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years for people to figure this out is surprising me. Now, they're saying that it's only because now people are getting AI to essentially do the research for them and it's corrupting the data. But the research was never good. It was always faulty, especially if you're paying people to take these surveys, which is what MTurk did. There was always an incentive for people to lie so they can make more money, and there was the amount of effort that goes into it. I mean, there's countless problems here, but I don't know if you've ever done any kind of research or usage of MTurk, but what are your thoughts on this one,
No,
buddy?
no, I haven't used MTurk, but I will tell you about the methodology parts that become really troublesome as we go through. And I'm not trying to escape the screen, but as we figure it out. One, I don't know if you've been just following the general trend that, especially within business research, so much of it has basically been just thrown into academic question lately from across really major
Yeah, the
researchers.
replication crisis. Yes.
The replication crisis, and you sit there and you start to go, well, how much of this research was actually ever good? And it gets back to the overcomplication of a lot of things that were probably best left simple. I think that's one part. The other piece is just in general, and I'm not a big believer in things like survey fatigue, but this bias of surveys is really uniquely interesting because I've been in companies where whenever you send out like say experience surveys, because I've done employee listening for a long time, it's like you started out in some companies, all the responses at the very first part of the survey are all positive, like everybody's super happy to take it, and then the scores go down as time goes on. And then there's other places where you're like the scores start down, where everybody in the company hates the company at the beginning, and then all their scores go up to where, how people go through it. And paying people for surveys is icky. You're not going to get the right spot. But a lot of surveys, a lot of employee listening, one of the weaknesses is there's just so many biases across, like, well, did you do it after a major, like, you have to think about all the timing attributes that go into getting feedback from somebody. I think about all the time, like if you think about with your spouse or your partner or whoever, you sit there and you go like, well, yeah, if you ask them the question at certain times of day, how happy are you? There's sometimes my wife's very happy. I mean, there's a lot of times it's not. That doesn't equate to the overall level of satisfaction. It's like, hey, buddy, you didn't put your socks in the dirty clothes. I am very not happy with you at this very exact moment. And it just gets into all of these components about how do we actually maintain that and maintain the integrity of understanding what that data is and what's directional versus what is true. And we have that issue across a lot of it. And you have to be really careful just in general when you look at research now, because of also the AI component of going like, well, is this even real? And what was imagined, or what is there that you're like, well, that looks really legit, but it's really, really not.
Yeah. there's so much there's so much red meat for the taking there. But
It
I'm
is a
gonna move
lot.
on to the last article, which basically was what you shared earlier about
Uh-huh.
performance management. But I did want to give credit. Kevin Murphy, a legend in the field of studying performance management, recently published this article called "The Illusion of Performance Management" in Human Resource Management Journal. And he essentially says everything that Buddy said earlier about why performance management is wrong. I'll add my one thing that maybe you left off earlier, which is performance management is not what it is. It is a tool to pay people and not get sued, right? To distribute rewards and to not get sued. It has nothing to do with motivating people to perform better. That is all a guise. It's always been a lie. This article talks about that to a certain extent, but gives a lot of the criticisms that Buddy levied earlier. Anything you'd add to your comments from earlier about what we could do? Well, why performance management is not working and what we could do to improve it?
Yeah, I think it's because you have to boil it back down. And to your point, the reason why we have it as a process in most cases is exactly that, versus going like, what does it drive to, and how does it deliver outcomes? And it's also part of why so many parts of organizations don't like HR, right? As you go through it, because we're putting processes, you go, well, what value did it go? That isn't to say I believe performance conversations should be happening all the time. That's called leadership, and it's how you hold people accountable, and it's the conversations. And some of the parts, like we talk about spans and layers and some of the other stressors we have, it's like, well, we've taken that out of so many, like layers. Like if you have 12 direct reports or more, how are you having real conversations about what the person delivered, what they could do to, what they could get to be better? What's that next stage for it, and what does that look like? It also assumes, the other problem is, it also assumes all of our leaders are really good performers and they actually know what they're supposed to be doing and what that is. And that's not necessarily always the case either, if expectations haven't been clear in it. So it's a full chain part where we're also assuming leaders as super people, where a leader actually knows and has enough span across so many parts to know what good looks like across that board, which isn't a great assumption actually, when it comes to find out what that is.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, I don't know, anything you wanted to talk about with me in particular, buddy, or you want to wrap this thing up?
Cole, I do. I'm highly appreciative of you. I'm highly appreciative of what you brought to our community through this. I'm highly appreciative of you having me on. But Cole, to a question earlier, I read a book a week. This is like one of Buddy's flaws. Now, are all of them like superb books? No, I finished a book last year that was an epic poem about werewolves on drugs in Los Angeles. So these are not like all meaty like books. But what's on your bookshelf right now?
Oh well, I did, and I think they're going to join the podcast later this year. David Edwards, who recently released the book about, I think it's called the Strategic Workforce Planning Handbook. So I'm going to bring him on and talk about it. But I was fumbling my way through that earlier this week, so that's probably the latest one that I've been looking into.
Oh, very good. I just finished. a shout out to Patty Phillips. I just finished her small. It's a smaller one of her books because Patty written I don't know how many books. My last business book was hers. Show the value of your workbook. So I'd give that a. If you're looking at for how do you do like ROI and thinking about especially on learning, that's a really helpful. Back to our conversation at I4CP that we had earlier, I got the book from her at I4CP, and I finally was able to crack it open. And I read your book too, Cole. That was one of the last books I read, which was excellent. I highly recommend it. But this week is not a business book, so it's back to more of my own personal development part, which is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. So that's what I'm going
Nice.
through this week.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, you're gonna be what's the name for that they have the people who it's like a whole area of philosophy and like Marcus Aurelius is one of them.
And he was I believe he's in the
Stoic.
Stoics.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's in the
Stoicism. Yeah,
Stoics.
he's one of the Stoics. So you're gonna be very stoic here before long, buddy, if you don't watch out.
You know what's so crazy? So a lot of people don't realize I do like a lot of work on my personal stuff, and I do that through my relationship with like different religions. But one of the books I highly recommend and I read it all the time, and it's great for like corporate life, is a Taoist book called The Saint. Like it's the Book of Chang Tzu,
Mm-hmm.
and I highly recommend it because there's so many parts of that where he like exposes the absurdity of like most of our normal existence, and he does it through a great, and, obviously a very long time ago, but through great humor. So if people want to read that and they start thinking about how it applies to their corporate life, it is highly recommended as well.
Well, fantastic. Well, if anybody wants to reach out to you after this, where can they find you, buddy?
You can find me easy to get me on LinkedIn. So just you can look up Buddy Benge on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only one. I don't know if there's any other Buddy Benges in America. I don't believe so. So I'm pretty easy to find there. Or you could email me at buddy.benge@edwardjones.com. More than happy to talk. I'm always open to share. Cole knows that. A lot of folks in the community know that. So
Yeah.
always happy. So I guess the key takeaways are Buddy rambles, Snoot, and at the end of it, Chang Tzu. So that would be
Yeah.
the three
Well,
parts.
you're one of a kind, buddy, literally and metaphorically. But you've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Linux podcast with your host, Cole Napper. Today's guest, Buddy Benge. Thanks for joining me, buddy.
Thank you, Cole.